Today we'll be using the raise hand feature as we typically do of Zoom. So if you don't know how to raise your hand in Zoom, then let us know in the chat and we'll help you find it. I will call on you who have raised your hand in order, and our call manager will invite you to unmute, and then you can open your microphone and ask your question of the chief. You need to acknowledge that we have a lot of journalists with us today, so fair warning. I'm not sure, we'll do our best to get to everyone. If you have follow-up questions, let us know and we'll circle back to you. But we do want to ask that you're respectful of your colleagues and allow everyone to ask questions today. All right, with that, I will turn off my camera, and Chief, when you're ready, go ahead and turn yours on, and we'll go ahead and get started when you're ready, Chief.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks everyone for being here today. I just wanted to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about some updates here at PPB and intro with some things that I wanted to touch on, then we can get to questions. But thank you all for making time today. First is probably best to lead with the budget. We're grateful to the City Council for their unanimous decision to provide additional funding to the Police Bureau. This is a good first step and a really hopeful step for us. In regard to hiring, we want to get our numbers up quickly, but I want to remind people that this process takes time. We've already begun posting for, and we're soon going to interview additional background investigators to bring them on to help us work through our candidate pool that we currently have in our applicant pool. We're also going to be working closely with DPSST to get the necessary slots in upcoming academies. And also the retire rehire piece is something that we're going to look at how to best implement and have in place. We do have people currently working here under previous retire rehire, so it's something we have some familiarity with, and we're looking forward to implementing that to help with our staffing. And I also wanted to give an update on the focus intervention team as well. I got an update on that today. We had 46 applicants put in for the 12 officer spots. As many of you know, we already have a lieutenant and 2 sergeants who have been selected and are working. We'll wrap up interviews for the officers today. And then we go through a process of, we call it a 360 review, but it generally talks to officers, supervisors, and peers to make sure that we're comfortable with those selections. We're still hopeful to have the selection process done by the end of the month, but I think it's going to be probably the first of the year before we have people actually out deployed. And this is because we have to transfer people from their additional or their current work assignment. They'll have to move to the FIT unit, and then there'll be some time to adjust shifts. Many of them will have different days off and probably a different work shift also. So we'll have to give them some time to make the necessary life adjustments to accommodate that. And then this is dangerous work, probably more dangerous than it's been in a long time. So we want to make sure we give folks the opportunity to get comfortable working together, make sure they have the opportunity to train together, and have some contact with the FIT COG, the Focus Intervention Team Community Oversight Group. And that's a really important reform, I would say. It's really giving community voice to this work in a way that we haven't previously. So I'm really hopeful for that piece as well. So really hopeful for FIT, look forward to them coming on board and being able to impact our gun violence issue. We've experienced 3 fatal crashes in the last week. We're coming into a time of year where it gets dark earlier, where we get inclement weather. We're up to 58 fatals for the year in Portland, and that's a lot. A lot of them involve pedestrians as well. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to remind folks to slow down, be cautious. I know PBOT is working on their end on some engineering things to make it safer for pedestrians and bicyclists in our city. And then last but not least, I really want to highlight some good work that's being done here at the Police Bureau. Despite the staffing shortages, we still have officers that go out every day, every night, work hard, provide good service. We've made some really important arrests in cases regarding illegal drugs, armed robberies, sex assaults. I've put out some tweets on some of that good police work. So I just want to highlight that here today. And I think that covers about all the stuff I've got. We can open up for questions whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Chief. For those of you who have questions, go ahead and hit that raise hand function. And again, if you're having trouble finding it, you can also hit us up in the chat. So I'll call first on Mike Benner from KGW with the first question. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey there, Chief. Again, Mike Benner with KGW. Thanks for giving us a few minutes. As you mentioned, with the fall bump, the extra officers, even the body cams, which you didn't mention, this sort of stuff doesn't happen overnight. But I know this issue is top of mind for people at home. Is there anything in the very immediate future people can expect to see happening? Something tangible, for instance?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. On the hiring piece, we are working on that right now. When we did take the last budget cut, we did have to lay off our backgrounders. We laid off, I think, a handful of those folks because we knew we didn't have the budget to hire. Our recruitment officers went back to the street, and then our recruitment manager got laid off as well. So we've been working diligently to rebuild that machine that does the hiring and personnel. We've posted for and have gotten candidates for background investigator. We're going to start those interviews as soon as possible and get our backgrounder staff back built up so we can process through the applicants that we're getting. The body camera piece, it takes time. There's still policy things we have to work through. There's still technology pieces to that puzzle that have to be sorted out. The good news is we've had a jump start on that for a little while. We looked at body cameras years ago, and we had money set aside for a pilot. So some of that upfront work was done, even some of the community conversations around it. But it does take time, and some of the stuff around body cams is still subject to negotiation too. So there's that piece to work out. But I'm really hopeful. I'll tell you that I want body cameras. Officers here want body cameras. So we're really hopeful to get moving with that process and have those deployed as soon as we can.
All right, thanks, Mike, for the question. Coming up to Liz Birch from Coin. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thanks so much again for your time. Given the news of the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict just today, wondering if you guys are expecting demonstrations tonight, what the preparations are looking like for the demonstrations, and if you expect there could be any clashes or counter protesters like we saw over the summer.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think, here in Portland, especially, it's reasonable to expect there will be some type of reaction to the verdict. And, like we've said many, many times, we're supportive of peaceful protests, people exercising their First Amendment rights. It's when people, engage in criminal activity, violence, or vandalism and destruction that we have issues. But we monitor that very closely. We've been monitoring the trial and the verdict, and we're in the process now of working through what our planning is going to be for today, tonight, the upcoming weekend, and such.
All right, thank you, Liz. Max Bernstein, go ahead, Max, when you're ready.
Thanks, Chief. I have a couple of questions. One, when you say you're working through planning without the RRT, what officers would you put on the streets if there is any civil unrest, for example?
Yeah, what we typically do in those situations is we use officers from the precincts. We use them in a configuration we call mobile field force. So we'll call officers from different precincts to come to respond to wherever there's, but we also work closely with our partners locally to see if we can kind of force multiply with some of their resources, and if they have different resources they could bring to bear to help. And I think for us, we really try when we can to add additional officers on overtime if we can get the folks to come out and work to kind of bolster not only the call taking piece that has to still go on when we do have crowd events, but also to help us if we do have unrest. So it's really a combination of precinct resources, folks we can hire on overtime, and any resources we can get from our local partners.
All right, thank you. David, I'm not sure what the last name is, but David, go ahead with your question.
I don't know why David Ashton and my East Portland news picture did not come up, but here we are. Criminals seem emboldened. Instead of shooting at each other, now they're shooting at officers as in Gateway that we covered this last weekend. People in Outer East Portland are asking, when can we expect the number of shootings to go down?
Yeah, that's a great question. One I don't have a definitive answer for. I'm hopeful that the implementation of the focused intervention team will help in that regard. And it's really troubling, as a officer, a police chief, when you see, brazen people shooting at officers. So no officers were hit or injured. And we had a couple incidents where troopers or officers were assaulted with vehicles recently too. So, I think as we can increase our capability and our staffing, I think that will help over time. But I really do think there's a lot of work to do to address community violence. It's not just necessarily a police thing. There's a heavy lift that I think a lot of community partners and other people can really do some work, and that will help.
All right, Sarah Hurwitz is up next. Sarah, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Chief, thanks so much.
Yes,
I am curious. So I spoke with the PPA president last week, and I asked him about kind of longevity look ahead with some of the numbers. And, in this budget, we're looking at 300 added to the Bureau within the next 3 fiscal years. And I said, how's that going to help in staffing? And he said, it'll help, but it's not going to get us back to where we really need to be. So I'm curious, and looking ahead, how long do you think it's going to take to get back to where the Bureau really needs to be? And yeah, I'm just curious, like the timeline and what else you think the Bureau might actually need.
Yeah, that's a good question, Sarah. And it's one that's, it's really interesting because people have different ideas of like what that number is. What is the exact right number? And I know today we don't have enough officers to answer the calls for service that we're getting. And I think calls for service are really a good measure on how many officers you need. Violent crime and crime statistics are something people use, but I think calls for service is a really important measure. It's going to take time to hire those folks. And I think as we move out into the out years, some of it really remains to be seen on, what Portland street response is going to evolve into. What will our capabilities with 311 and some other initiatives that are taking place now to redirect some of the call load? What will that look like? Because I think those things will affect that number, whatever that right number is in the future. But I know right now, as far as police departments on the West Coast and throughout the country, we're severely low in our numbers compared to our population and our call volume needs. So I think having additional officers will help address that, but the right number down the road, I think, remains to be seen, especially as we go into this time too, where there's a lot of demands for police reform and for police to do things differently and maybe do some different work. And we're really looking at things under a public safety umbrella now too, with Mike Myers and his community safety transition director role. So I think it's going to take several years to hire 300 officers. But I'm really hopeful that we can rebuild our personnel machine to where we can bring on people. There's actually some money in this bump too for additional capability at DPSST to hire more officers. Because as you talk about adding more officers, you still have to make up for the attrition that you'll see over those years as well.
All right, thanks for the question. Jonathan Levinson is next in line. Jonathan, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Chief, how you doing?
Hey, Jonathan.
Wondering, can you share your thoughts on what role the police play in preventing crime?
Yeah, I think the police, to me, really serve as a deterrent. I think that's maybe part of the most important role. I know throughout the years, we've been involved in other things that I think were really helpful in crime prevention down the road. We used to really have a strong footprint with youth when we had a youth services division, a school police unit. We used to be in schools teaching GREAT and DARE programs of that nature. We had a really active PAL program, Police Athletic League. We had a PAL center on the east side. And I think we're able to really have some positive impacts with youth throughout those efforts. And, I'm really sad to see those, like all the things that I mentioned have gone away. But I do think there is a strong deterrent role that the police can play. And I'm very, very supportive of all our community partners that go out and do outreach and intervention too. But I think there's a point where, if someone's rolling around with a gun in their car on a Friday night and they're looking to, the only intervention you might have at that point is the police making a stop or having a contact. So I think, when I look at it in terms of prevention, those are the things that come to my mind.
All right, next up is Max Bernstein again. Go ahead, Max.
Thank you. Chief, you mentioned that the Bureau is trying to work through a candidate applicant pool. So one, I wanted to find out if you know how many people are in that pool currently. And also on the body camera policy, I wanted to find out your position, whether you agree with the US DOJ's proposal that officers who use deadly force should not be able to review the footage before granting an interview or writing the reports.
Yeah, I'll start with your first question. I know we have several hundred people who, when we open up our application process, we get several hundred people who apply. I mean, that's one of the most heartening things to me is there's still a lot of people that want to do this work. As we whittle through the process and we do interviews and backgrounds, psych evals, medicals, and those sorts of things, the pool, shrinks drastically. And that's one of the tough parts about hiring is you might start with a large number of interested applicants. And when you go through your process, your lengthy process, you get down to a very, very small amount. But I do know, we're working through this, this candidate pool we have now. We'll open it up in the future and have very lengthy, maybe open continuous type of postings for people to apply. But we do get a lot of candidates. I think that's important for people to know. There are still people out there who are interested and want to be police officers. And the second part, a lot of the body worn camera stuff is subject to bargaining still. But I think when I think of it in terms of review of the video, I feel like, maybe the best way to think of it is if you have one opportunity to have just a personal recollection without seeing any type of footage, maybe you only have that opportunity one time. And then after you see footage, maybe then that goes away and you don't have that opportunity anymore. So I see kind of value in that. I see value in being able to look at the video as well. But, that's something I think we're going to work through on a policy level with DOJ at the table, the union at the table, and all the partners who we've been working through that stuff in mediation with currently.
All right, Liz Birch again. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, thanks. I was just hoping to follow up really quickly. You mentioned on the plans for potential demonstrations tonight, working with other local jurisdictions. Any plans to call in OSP, or would you ask the governor to call in the National Guard?
I don't know, that's a heavy ask. We do get support from OSP fairly regular. They have a Portland office as well. They've been a good partner to us. So has Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. They're local and we've worked closely with them. So the National Guard thing, I think, is a heavier lift than I think some people realize. But it really depends on what information we have and what we feel the level of threat is before we, would make that call. And there's a timing piece to it also. Sometimes there's just not time to do that. But I suspect we'll talk to OSP today, the county and some of our other partners, and we'll do the appropriate planning.
All right, Mike Benner, your follow-up.
Yeah, Chief, I'm curious. We've spent a lot of time in recent weeks and months talking to family members of the victims of gun violence, both present and past. And there's a little bit of concern amongst them that because of the violence, because of the high number of shootings and homicides, that maybe their case will fall by the wayside and never get solved just because there is so much going on and you guys are stretched thin. What do you say to those families?
You know, first thing I would tell them is that their cases are important to us. You know, the tragedy of losing a loved one to gun violence or in any other means is just devastating to a family. And I think, you know, that's really what the, you know, our units like cold case and our homicide unit, the work that they do, they leave their house, you know, the comforts of their home in the middle of the night to go out to a scene and work as hard as they can to solve these crimes. And they do it because they don't want to see the next family going through this pain that this current family is. And, you know, these cases are very, very important to us. We've moved resources to our homicide unit. I think at one time our homicide unit was about 10, now it's 18. We have the ECST out investigating these cases, the Enhanced Community Safety Team, and we're about to roll out the Focus Intervention Team. So we've always had a commitment to families, either through cold case or through homicide, to really work hard to get justice for their families. And, you know, I think people don't really know how hard some of this work is when you're out there trying to solve a case for a family and you're reaching out to community to try to get help and you're running into barriers. But what keeps you going is knowing that, you know, if you can solve this case, make this arrest, maybe take these guns off the street, that maybe some other family won't have to have that same level of suffering.
All right, Sarah Hurwitz has a question.
Hey, thanks again. Just curious on the piece with hiring incentives with the mayor's proposal in the budget. There was a piece in there about $25,000 signing bonuses. I'm curious what you think about that, if you think that's the right approach in attracting people to work for the Bureau.
You know, I think signing bonuses is something a lot of agencies have gone to. And I think on some level, you have to be competitive with your surrounding agencies and other places in order to attract candidates. And I'm not sure if it'll be $25,000 for every new hire, or it'll be some kind of scale, maybe dependent on someone's experience, their level of certification or training, or some type of scale like that. But I think, you know, throughout law enforcement, we've seen a real struggle to keep staffing levels to where they need to be to find good candidates, and good candidates are in high demand. So I think, you know, seeing things like signing bonuses, seeing the dollar amounts that you're seeing as far as signing bonuses are indicative of that problem in law enforcement. So I don't know what the right or perfect number is. We'll see what we can attract with our current signing bonus, and we might make adjustments if needed. But I think it's really indicative of what law enforcement's facing, trying to bring in quality candidates.
All right, thanks for the question. Max has another one. Go ahead, Max, when you're ready.
Thanks, Chief. I'm wondering how you would characterize the mayor and city council's handling of Portland's growing public safety crisis this year, whether they could have done anything differently.
You know, I think from where I sit, I always want to have, you know, the resources to do the job that I'm asked to do. No more, no less. I think that's a fair ask. And I think, you know, that's a tough job that they're in. They have to make decisions based on a lot of different factors. And, you know, the last year or two, there was a pretty strong public narrative too around policing. I'm just grateful that this go around with this fall bump package that they saw it necessary and prudent to give the police bureau additional funding. And now it's incumbent on us to use that funding to do things like hiring, implementing body cams, and turning that into things that are going to be helpful to the community.
All right, that's all the active questions we have. We have a couple more minutes for a few more. If you guys want to, we're going to aim to wrap it up here about 1:30. David, go ahead with your follow-up.
Yeah, what I'm unclear about is with the bump, this is one-time funding. How does this really help the overall problem when we're talking about 2 or 3 years if everything goes well to really come up to the levels of staffing that we really need? Is this just money that's going to be here, and then what's going to happen in the next budget cycle? I realize you don't have a crystal ball there. I can see you. You do not have one on your desk, sir.
I wish I had the answer to what would happen every budget cycle. It'd make a lot less worry for me. But no, that is a good point. It's a fair point. A lot of this is one-time funding, but I kind of view it as a commitment to an ongoing process. I feel like people know that this isn't going to get solved between now and next July. In order to actually implement, these things that are in this bump package, it's going to take time. It's going to take additional commitment beyond this budget year's bump to really see these things through.
Okay, Max has another one. Go ahead, Max.
Thanks. It's just a follow up. The current applicant pool that exists now, are there several hundred people who are in the pipeline now?
I could find out. I can get a readout from the personnel division, and we can share that with you. I know when we opened it the first, I want to say there was over 450 that initially had applied in that opening. So I don't know how many they've worked their way through with our, backgrounder staff. Our backgrounder staff currently is about half of what it used to be. So I can get you a number that's more definitive on where we're at, how many people are left in the applicant pool from the last opening.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Max, if you want to circle back, send me an email and I'll see if I can get any of that info for you later on, because I don't think we have it handy. I found out that KATU didn't get the original email, so I want to give Brian at K2, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute, and you can ask your question. I'll also give you a link to the stream that we put together for this, so you'll be able to go back and get some of the other stuff. Mike Benner has another question, so in the meantime, Mike, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, Chief, at the risk of sounding ignorant, I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. You mentioned the 4 to 450 possible candidates in the pool. Those would be folks eligible to be hired as maybe some of the new hundreds of officers that just came in through the bump, right? That's different from the focus intervention team, correct?
Yeah, it's different than the focus intervention team. So what we do is we would open up our application process and invite people to apply. And when we did that, we had, I think it was 450-ish people who had put in and applied initially. We start reaching out to those folks. They answer some initial questions and they start the process, and that number whittles down to a much smaller number. And then we get to the point where we start taking people through a background process, and our backgrounders start working with them on their background. And then that number shrinks from there. Then we do interviews, and then there's a medical, a psych eval, and those are all parts of the process too. And then you get a much, much smaller number of people that you end up hiring. But the focus intervention team will be essentially officers that will end up coming from our patrol response primarily, who will now be focused full-time on gun violence.
All right, I think that covers everybody's questions so far. Like I said, if there was any stats or anything that you need that we might be able to collect for you guys today, just send an email to ppbpio@portlandoregon.gov, and we'll do our best to get a response for you to help with your coverage. Like I said, we'll also if anybody missed part of this, I know K2 was not notified adequately, so I apologize for that. Send me an email, Brian, and we'll get you the video. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Anytime.